All right, good afternoon, everybody in the true crime community. Glad to be here. It's been a whole week since the last time that we were here live, and let me get the microphone in so that way you guys can hear me. Short stream today. When I say short, probably 30, maybe 45 minutes. So that's still quite a long time to be live, but a lot of information to cover. I've been watching a lot of stuff this week, and I queued up a couple of websites for you so we can talk kind of two cases. Obviously, the Idaho 4 is a case that we've been keeping up with for the most part, and there's been a couple of new developments. Nothing crazy, but it allowed us to kind of sit through the last 7 days and really reflect upon what did we see in that arrest affidavit, and can we piece some theories together of what happened that night. What does the timeline look like? That kind of stuff. So I'm going to hit that a little bit. And then I wanted to hit Ana Welshe and that story that, popped up this last week, essentially right after New Year's. What happened to Ana? How did she disappear? And what are some of the things that led up to her disappearance? And what are we finding from a court case perspective on that one? There's no arrest affidavit yet. We do think that, obviously her husband's been arrested, but not for the disappearance or the murder of Ana, at least not till this point, but really for getting in the way of an investigation. So I'll be curious to see, what's going to come out in that one. What is that arrest affidavit going to look like? What kind of information is going to be in there? Right now, it's a lot of information from sources, quote unquote. And we all know that a lot of the times that stuff can be 100% legit, no question, but there are times where information might be either left out or additional information is added just to make something look better than what it is, and that can really play a factor when you're going into the case. And a lot of the times it's to either clickbait if you're on social media or mainstream media to get people to watch, right? It's all about the ratings. So sometimes there's some embellishments when it comes to that. So I'm curious to see what everything's going to shake out with on that case. That's a pretty sad case so far. Now, to be fair, she hasn't been found yet. So there's still hope out there that maybe she just went for a walk or something and decided, like, I'm going to take a week or two off of life. I'm going to come back and I'm going to reappear in life and all things are going to be great. Now, do I think that'll actually happen? I don't, based off all the evidence so far, but there's still hope that that could happen because we haven't found, right? We haven't found a body or anything like that. So up to this point, everything's just kind of vanished. And we'll look at a couple of the cases from that perspective because I did queue them up, and we'll go kind of in that order. So let's go back to the Idaho 4. And before we do that, let me get my chat up so that way we've got chat rocking and rolling. Because that would be no good, right? If I didn't have my chat up and people were asking questions and things like that, that would be kind of bad. So first and foremost, let's talk Idaho 4. So we went through the 18 pages of affidavit last week, and that was a lot of information to unpack. I do appreciate some of the comments that came out of that, just people listening through, whether they're at the gym or out on walks and things like that, just to be able to listen to the information. I know the information is out there and it's plentiful. There's a lot of great channels that cover this information. You've seen it on my channel before, everybody that I follow, and before I jump off, I'll show you that as well on YouTube. A lot of the folks that I tune into, and I do tune into a lot of cases, by the way. These ones obviously being the most popular, especially on social media. And as I'm trying to grow my channel, I want to make sure that I get in on some of that as well, so I can build my viewer base, and then we can build our content based off what that viewer base wants. I will still be sticking with the Vanish series and the Missing series because I think that one, it does provide some entertainment from an entertainment standpoint, but it does also present some good because we can bring some eyes and some views on cases that may have been cold for a few years, with the exception of this week. Obviously I did Ana Welshe on my channel. That's only 7 days old. It's very popular, but for the most part, my other videos tend to lean towards people that have been missing for a year or longer, and we'll continue to do that. And hopefully we can get enough views that somebody might see something in one of those cases and be able to provide a clue to the authorities. And that's kind of the intent behind it. But it doesn't mean that we won't change content at some point. So look forward to that. All right. A lot of rambling. So one more thing I want to hit before we get into the Idaho 4 is that we just hit 55 subscribers today. That's almost one a day. We've only been doing this just under 90 days. If you take out the short videos, because I don't really count those because they're previous content, we've done 25, maybe 30 videos, I think 25 videos. So we're averaging probably 2 subscribers per video. And we're coming up on 5,000 views so far. So on a small channel like mine that just started it's about 3 months ago. That's a lot. And I want to appreciate everybody for tuning in and, some of the folks that have been sharing out my videos and sharing out my content. I really do appreciate that. 5,000 views. I mean, that's almost enough to fill an arena. Not quite packed, but that's a lot of people to get content out to. And a lot of those folks have provided feedback that's helped the channel get better. So I want to appreciate that. So that's not why you came here. You wanted to talk a little bit about the Idaho 4 and Mr. Bryankohberger, and then you also wanted to see what was up with Ana Welshe. So let's go over to Bryankohberger first, and before we jump into some of the stuff that we've seen here, let's just do a little recap of what that arrest affidavit really said. And I'm going to transition here so you can see my screen. So you have my screen in the background. So first and foremost, there was a lot of information in that 18-page affidavit, right? And like I had stated before, like the Delphi murders only had 9 pages. I think it was like 8.5 pages. So it was just under half. So that was a lot of information that they, presented in the Bryankohberger case. And we really kind of tackled, what the defense attorneys would go after and what the prosecution would go after to try to make a case. And that was just based off of what we saw in that affidavit. Now, keep in mind, there's a lot of other information that's going to come out in court. We understand that. There was 113 pieces of evidence, and I would imagine there's probably a lot more now that they have a suspect. Obviously, the Elantra is going to play a key factor in that. Did they find anything in that? Did they find anything else in the trash other than just DNA, right? But I kind of thought through this the last week, and there was a couple of things that stuck out. So first thing first is that everything in the affidavit that I saw is all circumstantial. There was nothing that was really a smoking gun in that one. So that makes me a little bit nervous because even though, Bryankohberger is going to have public defenders, they already seem to be taking the right steps in his defense and are already trying to do things to kind of put doubt out there, not only in the public, but to potential jurors that could be coming on. For example, they really continue to keep hitting, has there been anybody else that was arrested? Quote unquote co-defendant, right? And they want any information that could be provided from a co-defendant. And this leads me to believe that that's going to be one of the defenses that pops up. And I did read an article that said, are they trying to set themselves up for a defense that shows that he was set up as an individual? And that might be the case. That could be the case, because if we go back and we look at the affidavit, we know that DM, aka probably Dylan, but they use the initials DM, that she saw somebody that was coming out with bushy eyebrows and then a facial, a half mask, right? So the thing that I saw in the request from the defense was, was there a lineup that she looked at previously, or was there going to be a lineup where she could go in and identify somebody? And if that was the case, obviously at that point, then they're suggesting that Bryankohberger was never in a lineup for her to identify, and they're going to have to come forward with the evidence that shows that she was able to identify him via picture or whatever the case that might be. And I think at that point, they're going to bring in some sort of expert that's going to say, after a traumatic event, she may have remembered X, Y, and Z. And is there a likelihood that that might not be Bryan? Which then people would combat that with, hey, what about the DNA evidence? And I would say that's pretty close to smoking gun. But again, the DNA evidence is of his dad. And the DNA evidence says that it's 99.7% sure that it would have to be the offspring of his dad, right? And a male offspring. So, one could argue that. But, you could go in court and say, hey, maybe he's got offspring somewhere else that he doesn't know about. Is that plausible and possible? Yeah. Now, would a jury go for that? That's up to the jury, right? Would I believe that? No. Do I believe, that there's a lot of evidence that points Bryankohberger's way? Absolutely. But I'm not a lawyer either, and I don't have to fight that in court. So that is a very interesting point that I've been seeing out on the forums lately. A couple other things that popped up that I thought were interesting was, there's the Facebook user, and I can't remember what the name was, but basically was eerily close to, the details and the facts. Was that Bryankohberger that was doing that, or was that somebody getting lucky? I'll be interested to kind of see what that looks like. I also think that, bold move, but smart move for Bryankohberger to waive a speedy trial, right? He was in court yesterday, and I think it was yesterday. It might have been the day before, and I apologize. I've been a long week at work, but, and he waived that right. They don't want to go back to court till the end of June. It's the last week of June when they go back into court. And even at that point, that's all going to be discovery, and that's all going to be to see if they proceed to go into trial, right? Like the prosecution is going to have to present evidence at that point that is going to lead a judge to believe that there's enough evidence to convict, and that points towards Bryankohberger. And obviously the defense right now is trying to prove that there could have been somebody else involved, or another thing that they might try to prove, that one person was not capable of committing this crime by themselves. So if only one piece of DNA was found, then where's the other person? And that could very well be a plausible defense for Mr. Kohberger. A couple other things that I think that they're going to look at is, are they able to place Bryan in the house at any time? So if you go back and look at some of the videos, and this is a very interesting take, some of the videos of the police coming over with the body cams and coming over to talk about the noise violations and things like that seem very insignificant. But from a defense standpoint, these videos are very significant, and the videos themselves are going to be very telling. So in at least 2 of the videos that I've watched, and 2 of the videos that you folks have watched, right, the police went there to file a noise complaint, or to talk about a noise complaint that a neighbor had made, right? And it looked like the first one was the initial contact. So, the way a noise complaint typically goes, they'll get a warning first, and then they'll get a ticket. It doesn't need to go that way, but, back in my younger years, used to have cops come over quite a bit. We had a quote unquote party house, and typically they would give us 2 or 3 chances before they'd shut us down and fine us. And the fines were a lot cheaper back then. But if you see the first time he goes up, or the first video we see, so I don't know if it's in the timeline, but he essentially talks to Maddie, and Maddie is not home, and she says nobody that lives there is home right now, which would lead us to believe that there's people in the house that they know that are partying together, right? But the owners of the home aren't home. So if you think about that, one of the arguments that the defense could make at that point is there's a good possibility that Bryankohberger's at the house that night. Now, on camera, right, and on the phone, Maddie says that there's nobody that lives at the house is at the house. Now, you also see one of the gentlemen come out that says the same thing. None of the owners are there. So could Bryankohberger use that as a defense and say, hey, I was at the house that night? That would be a pretty good defense, right? And that would also explain why, if his DNA is found at the house, why his DNA was at the house, right? And it would also kind of leave some doubt with the jurors, because at that point, maybe he's walking all the floors, or maybe somebody gave him a tour, or whatever the case might be. But that is a very real possibility in that scenario. And that'll be interesting to me how the prosecution combats that. Now, again, my beliefs is that everything is pointing his way. I do believe that everybody deserves a fair trial, and this video is just opinion of mine and nothing more. I'm not a lawyer, and I've stated that in the past, but these are all the things that I think the defense is going to attack and really go after, and that's what's going to make this case very interesting from that perspective. Okay. So the second thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of a trigger warning, is I really want to talk about the timeline of how things happened. And, we talked about that in the affidavit last week, but I've been just thinking about this the whole week, been pondering it. I've talked to people about it, like, how does this happen, right? If you look at the timelines in the original arrest affidavit, it's showing, the murders occurred between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. If you dig in a little bit deeper and you see where the car was seen on camera at 4:04 a.m. and then at 4:20 a.m., that leaves 16 minutes for somebody to essentially park a car, walk into the house, do what they need to do, come back out, get back in the car, and speed away. Now, this is hard to swallow, but what I will say is that is very possible right there, that timeline, obviously, right? I've never killed anybody, so I couldn't say how long it takes, but obviously this was planned out. So when you look at the first degree murder charge, if somebody only had 16 minutes to go in, including walking from their car to the house, up the stairs, down the stairs, to a couple of different bedrooms, back out to their car, and be gone, that is definitely premeditated and planned, because that is very efficient, right? Now, one could say, like, hey, how would you know? I wouldn't know. I just, in my mind, it's hard to wrap around how this all could have went down. But I did put some theories together, and I did see some theories online. So I'll discuss those first and give credit where credit is due. So the first one is the DoorDash person arrives at 4 o'clock. We've already established that, right? Now, I did see on another video, which was Crime Circus, if you've ever seen that with Drip Drop, great content for sure. But he had stated in there that the Jack in the Box was found on the table on the first floor, which I haven't seen anything different. So we'll take that at face value and say, okay, that's where it was found. And I won't go into his theory. That's his video. I suggest go check it out if you want to see his theory. But part of it was that this could have been Bryankohberger that sent the food. My theory is a little bit different. I think that Xana did order the food because her name was on it. And what my theory is that the DoorDash would have came at 4 a.m. And if you're like me, you don't eat your food in your room ever, right? I've never have, even when I was in college and I had roommates, never ate in my bedroom. That was just a big no-no. That was something that, for some of you that grew up, you were told that bed bugs would come, right? Don't let the bed bugs bite and all that stuff. And, you don't want to leave cookie crumbs for the bed bugs and all that, right? So that was since I was a little kid. So I've never really eaten in my bedroom, and I've never ate in bed unless it was like a special occasion and you do like breakfast in bed or something. And I would have done the same thing. So if my food would have arrived at 4 a.m., keep in mind that's pretty early. She had went out with Ethan earlier that night. Who knows how much alcohol they drank, if they drank any alcohol, what their blood level was. And I know we're going to find this out with the case, but I'm going to use myself as an example. I went out on New Year's. I was pretty deep in adult beverages, and, I would have just by my natural self would have put in food on the table, right? On the kitchen table, wouldn't have thought about it, would have went back up to the bedroom, would have grabbed Ethan and then brought them back down. Or, maybe I wasn't hungry and I needed to go to bed or whatever the case was, but I would have left it on the table downstairs. So here's what I think happened, because we saw in the video previously that at 4:12, Xana's on TikTok, right? So from 4:04 to 4:20 is when we know that the murders happened. So who knows when the suspect comes into the house? You figure it's got to be between 4:05 and 4:19, roughly. Could be like 4:04:30, whatever, right? So you figure that the suspect went upstairs first. Now, I could be dead wrong on this, but based off of what DM said, she said that she had heard somebody say that somebody's at the house. Now, in my perspective, this could have been when the DoorDash guy arrived and not necessarily when the suspect entered the house. So what I think might have happened is the DoorDash person arrived at 4, because that's what it's showing in the affidavit. And then at 4 a.m. dropped it off, rang the doorbell, knocked on the door, whatever the case might be. And then Xana goes downstairs to retrieve that bag. We know DM didn't. Now, I would assume that Kaylee and Maddie were still upstairs at that point because she thinks that she hears Kaylee say that somebody's in the house. Now, could that be when the suspect was in? It absolutely could be, but I think it wasn't. I think it was when the DoorDash person was there, and I think Xana went down and got the food and then put the food on the table, came back upstairs where Ethan was at, maybe left the door open, maybe closed the door, not quite sure on that one, but then went back to watching TikTok. Now, keep in mind, if she's watching it on her phone, typically it's going to be decently loud, not super loud, but you're not going to listen to it very quiet, especially in a college house for the most part. So things might get by you. You're going to hear dogs barking, which is going to be pretty normal. I have dogs. You hear them in my background all the time. Every time they bark, I don't freak out and think something's going on. I think usually that somebody may be walking by or they're barking at each other, right? So then we hear that she comes out, DM comes out and then hears Kaylee crying and then says that I'm going to help you, right? So was that Kaylee? It possibly could be. It could have been Xana as well. But I think that she was probably dead on and she would have been a better judge of character and sound than I would have been because I wasn't there. But she probably did hear something that was upstairs. Now, let's pause right there for a second, right? So maybe that's when the murders are going on, whatever the case is. It's a pretty short time frame based off the witness statement that she gives, or at least that's what's in the affidavit. So you figure something's probably happening. If somebody's crying, they've probably already been stabbed. And then, whatever's happening is happening at that point. Maybe there's yelling, maybe there's screaming. We're going to find out more, or maybe it really happened super fast. But what I think happened, if you look at the house and the way that it's set up, why was Xana targeted next? And I don't think she was first. I think she went second based off of the TikTok. I think that at some point, Xana may have came out and was trying to investigate herself, just like DM was, to see what was happening and who was crying, because maybe she heard something while she was watching TikTok. And when the suspect came down, may have noticed that. Right? And then decided to go for that room. And then when he was done there, he might have thought like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed or too much stuff happened or I've taken too much time and I'm going to leave. I don't think that it was ever the intent to leave DM alone, right? And she said that she froze and watched him walk out. So that means she didn't close the door and lock it out. Like she was frozen in fear. And we all know that, fight or flight is definitely a real thing in people. And listening and hearing something like that, oh man, that's gotta be scary, right? And I don't know what I would do. I'd probably freeze too, right? And I'm typically not scared of a whole lot of people, but that would be a pretty freaky thing to hear and then see somebody coming down. So I think that's how it kind of went down. I think Xana might have startled the suspect, and then the suspect ended up in her room, and maybe Ethan had woken up at that time, or maybe he didn't or was just waking up. But I think at some point Ethan would have been sleeping and or just not really with it, so wasn't really paying attention, right? And I think that kind of sums up the timeline. And then I think the suspect leaves and then ends up driving away, getting to their car and driving away, or whatever the case is. It'll be interesting to see when the prosecution goes through to see if that's how the timeline goes. And that would be based off the theory that the suspect went up first. And I'm using that theory based off of when Xana was on TikTok, but I think that's essentially how it went down. What I can't wrap my mind around, and it's probably because I've never participated in something so gruesome, obviously, if you've never done it before, and we think that the suspect's never done it before, I just can't imagine as a human being like doing it once and then wanting to do it 3 more times right after. But then I suppose I can't imagine as a human being like picking a random house and just doing that, right? It's crazy to me. And even looking at the timelines, even though the timelines kind of make sense, I just can't wrap my mind around it. It just seems too fast. Then you go back and look at the videos, like the videos of the 2 girls walking, and you see them under the light post, and they're talking about, who they told what to, and what does Adam know? And I told Adam everything, and, to the point where they were calling Jack, and, and then I think about like, what if Jack would have answered and maybe Jack and Adam came over and nothing happened, or maybe they came over and more stuff happened. Like if they got a hold of him. I mean, like there's a lot of what ifs of what could have happened for this not to happen. And for whatever reason, it's in my head, right? And it's like, wow, like there's just so many things that would have had to have aligned for the suspect to be able to do it. And then what makes a suspect tick? What's even more scary is looking at the Reddit of Bryankohberger, because obviously he's the suspect right now. It's just, wow, it's just crazy to me, and it's a hard thing to wrap my mind around. So those are some of the things that were kind of on my mind the last week. I'd love to hear from you folks. Was there other things that you seen or heard that kind of stuck out to you, or that is kind of suggesting, what kind of defense that they're going to go after? And I'll be honest with you. Again, I will state this. You're innocent until proven guilty, and everybody deserves a fair trial. My hope in this case was that when they found a suspect, that the suspect confessed because of how gruesome it was, and that they just couldn't live with themselves. And obviously that's not going to happen. And maybe Bryankohberger ends up being innocent and we find a different suspect. Crazier things have happened. So I am going to state that. I will say again, the evidence does point his way, and that's the way that I lean, is where the evidence goes. But it's, to me, is like, wow, a lot of things would have had to have aligned, and a lot of things look scary at this point. And I'm trying to think how the defense is going to approach this. And then also, how is the prosecution going to approach this? Because obviously there's got to be some evidence out there that's even better than what we see in the affidavit, right? Because even the prosecution would tell you that this is all circumstantial so far. So there's got to be some stuff in there that's going to be a little bit more. And I would suspect that evidence was going to be when they arrested Mr. Kohberger, they were going to take his DNA and actually match DNA to get that smoking gun, rather than try to tie it back to a parent, right? So again, let me hear your thoughts on that one. I know that's a lot of information to unpack, a lot of information that I covered right there, and really a lot of opinion and thoughts on my own that I think the way that this case is going to play out. I do watch a lot of this. I work a lot too. So a lot of the time is like when I'm going to bed, I'll read a story on it, or I'll see some of my favorite YouTubers, which again, I promised I would show you at the end, some of the ones that I follow. I don't always necessarily agree with their theories, but it is kind of cool to see. And sometimes they come up with stuff that I didn't notice. Like I said, like Crime Circus had some good information around the Jack in the Box bag. So, and again, you hear my dogs barking in the back. Doesn't freak me out. There's 3 of them. They're probably fighting each other. Or somebody came in, but they don't freak me out. They're pretty big dogs too. So there's that. The last thing I want to hit on the Idaho 4 before we hit Ana Welshe is just that, this kind of hit me too. I was questioning this a little bit yesterday. If you see the cuts on his face, on Bryankohberger's face, that was hitting the post pretty hard yesterday. And, the first question I had asked was like, would those cuts still be there 2 months later and look that fresh? There's no way, right? The other thing too is when we see him in other pictures, like if you see the other pictures, like let's look right here. I don't know if you guys can see that video, but when he looks into the car and he sees Mr. Kohberger, you can see that Mr. Kohberger doesn't have any cuts there at that point. And this would have been like the mid frame or the mid time point from the time that the murders were committed to the time that he was actually in court here. So I did think, even with the gag order, that it was smart for the authorities to come out and say, and that was the county jail, and say, hey, he got this it was self-induced from shaving. Because I think that's going to put a lot of stuff to bed, right? And it's just noise that nobody needs to hear right now, and it's probably noise that doesn't need to be on the forum. So just a couple of things to think about, and we'll kind of go from there. So pretty freaky looking, but a lot of that has to do with what we think so far. All right, moving on. Miss Ana Welshe. So this one was kind of interesting, and I made a video for my YouTube channel on this one because, she vanished without a trace. And I'm not going to hit all the facts in here because I do have the video up, and if you want to see the facts, go on the video. But I did want to state off the get-go that in the video, I did not highlight the fact that Bryan was already on house arrest for a previous arrest, trying to sell fake paintings. Okay. I didn't really see that as being necessary information that contributes to getting the information out there on Ana. But I just wanted to state that on the live stream because it's a lot easier to get a lot more information out on a live stream rather than having to write it down and kind of storyboard before I make a video. I do a lot of research before I do them, and then I try to cut a lot of stuff out if there's a lot of rambling. Whereas in my live streams, you just suffer through the rambling because I got a lot of things to say. But I just wanted to state that out there that that was piece of it. Now, a couple of things that we found out since that video is that, there had been some people that had come out and said that Ana had been trying to sell off a lot of her stuff and trying to come up with capital in a short period of time. Let me get a drink here. I don't exactly know what that means, so I'm going to again state this. This would be strictly opinion for me. That would lead me to believe that maybe she was getting ready to leave, file for divorce, separate, and possibly go on her own, maybe get an apartment or move in with somebody else. If you look back at some of the information that I didn't have a couple of days ago, one piece that's flying around the internet right now is that, she had already reported that she had felt threatened by Bryan back in 2014 and said that, if she dies, that he would likely be the person that had killed her. Now, I'll state it again. There's still hope in this case because a body hasn't been found, at least not to my knowledge, as of this live stream. And it's only been a few days, right? So now, obviously, the argument that could be made there is that every hour that goes by, there's less likelihood, less hope. And then obviously after the first 24 hours, there's not a lot of hope either. But without a body, there's always hope, right? So again, I'll state it like I did at the start of this live stream. Hopefully she's just out taking a vacation and she comes back in, and maybe she just wanted a break, and maybe she wants a clean break from Bryan. Now, here's the reasons why I don't think that that's the case. One, why did it take so many days to report her disappearance? Now, I will argue that maybe not on New Year's Day. Maybe you don't report her New Year's Day if she goes missing. Maybe it's a day you wait. I know for me and my wife, it could take some time. Like, I travel a lot. I'm out of town a lot. I'll be out of town next week again. She's out of town sometimes. We work different schedules sometimes. And, so maybe a day. Okay. When I say a day, I'm talking about a sleep. So maybe she doesn't come home at 5 or 6 o'clock, sleep on it. You wake up in the morning, still don't notice. You send out some texts, you make some phone calls, you phone some friends, you phone family, you phone hospitals, whatever the case might be, right? It would be a devastating situation, but that would probably be the maximum. So why would you wait until the 4th? My theory on that, if you watch my video, obviously I think that her company was going to call, because you hear the voicemail of Bryan calling the company and saying, "Hey, have you saw Ana? Sorry." I think everything's going to be, or I think everything's fine, but just wanted to check in. And then at some point they had called in to report her missing. Now, it is stated that it was simultaneous, that Bryan was doing it with the company, but on record, it actually shows the company called in first. So take that for what it is. But either way, why does it take 4 days? Doesn't look good, doesn't make you guilty, but it doesn't look good. Okay. Now, a couple other pieces is the $450 spent at the Home Depot, I think is pretty crazy, for cleaning supplies. Now, is that out of the ordinary for most people? For the most part, yeah. I think when you're moving into a new house, I could see spending $450, and that wouldn't be abnormal for me. But they'd been in this house for a few months, and you could make that argument that maybe they had never done that, but the day after and still haven't reported on a missing, and you're going after all those cleaning supplies, does not look good. That does not look favorable, and I just can't imagine from a jury's perspective that that's going to look good. But keep in mind, we only have half the story. We don't have Bryan's story, and we don't have the defense's story. So we can't formulate an exact opinion until we hear that. We can only go based off of what we're hearing in the media, and this stuff hasn't even been put into an arrest affidavit, right? Now, keep in mind, he was arrested because he did omit some information, and essentially that's obstructing an investigation. And what that tells me is the authorities do believe that it's him, and so they've charged him with something so they can hold him. Now, his lawyer's going to fight hard to try to get him released on bond, obviously, and on a lesser charge. The judge is probably going to be inclined to do that, but it gives the authorities a little bit of power to be able to keep him monitored, which he's already being monitored anyways, and try to keep a tab on him. Now, because he was already on probation, this might play a factor where it could revoke his probation and get him back into jail, right? So a couple of things to think about on this one. I did hear about the some of the blood that may have been found downstairs, and then a bloody hatchet that may have been found as well. Now, keep in mind, for us online sleuths, that's going to look like a smoking gun. Doesn't necessarily need to be or means that it's a smoking gun. You could, as a defense attorney, you could talk through this pretty easily. Did Ana ever have a bleeding nose? Did she ever have a cut? Did she ever use the axe? Normal everyday stuff happens, depending on what that axe looks like. And then depending on what's in the basement, right? Is there laundry down in the basement? Is there a washer and dryer? Is there any need for them to be in the basement? Is there an entertainment room? Things like that. I have a bar in my basement, right? So if I ever got a bloody nose, I'd probably leave blood down there. So the defense would argue that that was just normal everyday stuff. Now, we haven't seen what that looks like, but again, doesn't look good for this Bryan either. And, if you put two and two together, it's kind of the tales of the Bryans, and they better hope they have good defense attorneys. So again, this is all just my opinion, but I think that this is some of the things that we're going to run into. A couple other facts in this case that I found that was really interesting was that Ana was scheduled to go out to Washington, D.C., and the story that Bryan is giving is that she had to make an emergency trip 48 hours prior to when that ticket was going to be used. And they have no record of the Uber that he says that she used, right? And we know that ride shares are pretty consistent with their reporting, both for the safety of the driver and because all the heat they've taken in previous cases, which is essentially the safety for the riders, right? So typically you're not going to have a rideshare pick you up and there's no record of it. Could it happen? Yeah. Anything in life could happen. Is it a possibility? Yeah. Is it plausible? Probably not. But either way, and then there's no record of her boarding a flight or using any ticket or purchasing an emergency ticket. So basically, if you look at the movie A Few Good Men, it's legitimately a flight that existed, but for Ana, it didn't exist, right? And I mean that more so on the Jack Nicholson side than the Tom Cruise side, because Tom Cruise proved that it did exist. There's no way we're going to prove that she ever had a ticket, ever boarded a flight, because none of the surveillance is showing that. None of the transactions show that. So I think that, this Bryan guy thinks he's pretty smart, clearly. Based off what he's done in the past, especially with faking art, he thinks he's a lot smarter than most people. And that was the story he came up with. And that's what we're seeing right now. The one question that I do have, and this is for the audience out there, is how do guys like this ever get into a relationship anyways, right? Clearly he's had issues with integrity in the past, and that always blows my mind. And nobody's perfect, and I'm not saying that they are, but if he was already threatening her back in 2014 and he's getting arrested for stuff and looked like the finances were going down, how do guys like that win in life? And that's just a question, and that's nothing on Ana, right? She's the victim here, or at least we think she's the victim. Again, I say there's hope because maybe she just went on a vacation. Highly unlikely, but it is possible. But you just look at a guy like this that just continues to, just think he's above the law and above the world. And he does deserve a fair trial just like anybody else. But let's judge him for, what he's been convicted of in the past. So what I'm talking about is not her disappearance, not her murder or anything like that, because we don't know that that's happened. but look at the integrity issue with selling fake art. Look at the issues of him already threatening her life. Things like that. That tells me like, okay, something's going on with this guy that's just not okay. And it continues to not be okay. And that does not look good. That does not make him a murderer, and it doesn't make him guilty of this case, but it just doesn't look good. So with that being said, I'm not going to hit any more on this one because there is a lot of things that are going, you know, and a lot of information. Like I said, if you want to see the whole video, you'll see kind of the timeline that was in my video, and you'll see some of the weird things that happened, like their old house attic starting on fire and stuff like that. And I think that at the end of the day, I would encourage you to go watch it. Go watch my video on that. You know, definitely leave a comment, see if you like the information, if it's entertaining or not. I would also love to hear from you from the live streams. Do you want to see more live streams? Do you want the live streams to be longer or shorter? I'll definitely continue to try to get people to participate because I do like being live. I'm live on my gaming channel probably 4 nights a week already. So it's hard trying to maintain 2 channels, but both of them are doing fairly well for being 3 months in. And that's because of you, the subscriber, and the power that you have as a subscriber, and the most motivating comments that I get day in and day out makes me want to keep doing it. I know I'm a small channel. Most of my videos, I'm getting enough watch time to maybe do half of the effort I put in. It might take me upwards of 10 hours to do a video. Even simple videos require that I storyboard, find the information, shoot the video, cut the video, find the pictures, upload the video, all of that stuff. And then I might get 2 or 3 hours of watch time. But it's so that one comment that comes across that says, hey, we like your content, or we'd like you to do this, or, you know, we'd like to see improvements there. That just tells me that you're engaged and that you like the content, and that keeps me going. So I do appreciate that from you folks on both of my channels. And with that, I'm going to wish everybody a great long weekend. I may be live again this weekend, maybe Sunday or Monday, depending if there's any updates, or I might bring some other cases. I'm watching a lot of cases right now. Obviously, like the Cabo 6 and Shanquilla Robinson is a very interesting case to me right now, and I'm curious to see how that goes down. And another place that I go is on Facebook. I'm in a couple of true crime places on Facebook that I think that there's a lot of cases in there that aren't highly publicized that are very interesting cases that I would love to cover with you folks as we get bigger. So I promised it. I'm going to show it to you right now. If you look on the far left of my screen, you're going to see some of the folks that I follow. I had hit Crime Circus earlier and Drip Drop. A lot of times Crime Circus is going to have new information on there. Highly suggest following. Now, he doesn't need me to help him out by any means. I think he's at 250,000 subs right now. News Nation has been pretty good, especially with the Idaho cases. They're constantly putting updates out there. True Crime Daily. Evil Exists, that's had some good stuff on it. Christina Randall, I mean, she's pretty big. You've probably already heard of her before. She doesn't typically, I don't see her doing a lot of the up-to-date stuff as much. She has been doing the Idaho updates. I think she's 3 videos deep in that right now. But typically she's telling stories from stuff that's happened in the past, and she's a really good storyteller when it comes to that, especially with her experiences, I think, kind of tie into it really nicely. Titanium Built, just started watching her not very long ago, but does a lot of live streams. So if you like live stuff, check her out. Obviously Bailey Sarian, Mr. Ballin, storytellers. You know, Bailey does makeup while she's telling it. Something I couldn't do, obviously, but she does a good job and has a lot of, I think it was like 6 million followers. Mr. Ballin, you know, obviously one of the fastest growing YouTube channels probably in history. You know, really cool to see. Mr. Nightmare, I don't think that's anything new to you folks. And then Real Crime. And then I also watch, I missed this one, I don't know why, Law and Crime. So these are all the areas that I go on YouTube. Now, obviously, mainstream media, I don't discriminate when it comes to that. You saw that earlier. I'll look at Fox, I'll look at CNN, I'll look at NBC, I'll look at CBC, I'll look at basically anywhere that's going to have information. And then I spend a lot of times on forums, whether it's Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, and then try to decipher information and then try to tie back to what the authorities are saying, because there is a lot of information, even with the mainstream, that may not necessarily be true, or it may be a little bit more embellished, and that's always dangerous to try to come back from, right? So that's basically what I'm looking at, and you can see a lot of the times, like you'll see like Christina right there, obviously, she's talking about Bryankohberger in this video, but you'll see like there's a lot of folks that I look at or I watch that you'll see like on my feed, right? And then on this, a lot of this stuff is going to be crime related. Except for maybe the one dog one, because I love my dogs too. But you'll see like Shanquilla Robinson, you'll see Ana Welshe, and you'll see the Idaho 4, and there's other ones that I'm following right now on here that I would love to cover. But we'll wait and see how well the channel's doing. And again, it takes me a lot of time to run 2 channels plus a full-time job. It's probably 80 or 90 hours a week, and I have to dedicate to my full-time job. That always has to take priority because that puts food on the table, obviously. So I don't let anything get in the way of that. But again, you folks just make it so great as subscribers, and the comments that you leave down below are just super heartfelt and makes me want to continue to bring content. And more importantly, I think it makes me want to improve the content and try to bring something to you that's going to be entertaining. So again, I'm going to wish you a well weekend. I said we're going to be about a half hour to 45 minutes. We're coming up on that 45 minutes. So if there's any cases you would like to see, just leave a comment on this video. I'll see them, and then I'll work towards it. I did have a request today on a video for this week coming up. That's going to be based out of the Quad Cities. And this was a person when I was at work, found out I was doing true crime, and had asked me if I would do one, or had suggested. So I'm looking forward to do that this week, and we'll bring that video to you next Wednesday. But in the meantime, if there's videos you would like to see of missing people, just leave a comment down below on that, and I will work on those. And or if there's stuff you'd like to see in the live stream or materials you would like me to bring, I can do all of that. I don't show everything because sometimes it's especially YouTube videos, a lot of time that's going to be other people's content, and I don't want to overstep their bounds, but I can summarize a little bit. And I'm going to leave you with that. So have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully this 45 minutes was well worth your time. On that note,